So this video is going to talk a little bit more about climate. In the previous one, we talked about the factors that affect climate. Now we're going to look at how climate is classified or sorted. So there's this guy named Köppen, and Köppen came up with the classification system, and we call it the Köppen Climate Classification System, which is just fun to say, but I'll say it a little slower, the Köppen Climate Classification System. And so he found all these different climates around the world, and he decided, well, let's figure out a way that we can sort them and name them based on similarities they have. So here are the 5 main groups he came up with. One is called humid tropical, then you have a humid mid-latitude, then dry, highland, and then polar. A lot of this will be a shorter video because a lot of this is very self-explanatory and common sense based on the things that you know. But the 2 things that he used in order to create this classification system is temperature and precipitation. So Köppen's classification is based off of temperature and precipitation. Why is that? Because climate is based on temperature and precipitation. So he went on different parts of the world and saw how much temperature, or what the temperature was and how much precipitation they got, and that's how he came up with these groups. So our first group is the humid tropical group, and you can see it in blue to the left, but the humid tropical group is in the tropical zone, so by the equator. And we know that if something is tropical, that means that it's warm, so it's going to be hot year-round. And if it's humid, that means there's going to be a lot of moisture. So your humid tropical is going to be warm, and then it's going to have a lot of precipitation. Now, he breaks the humid tropical group up into 2 subcategories. So the first type of a humid tropical is called wet tropical. So wet tropical, based on the name, is going to have very warm temperatures, and it's going to have a lot of moisture, a lot of rain. And so you can see that here. This picture is from Indonesia, and I think it's very interesting. This is showing you can see all the humidity in the air. And down here, this is actually showing you an example of contour plowing. And the crop they're growing is rice. But if you remember, contour plowing is that staircase way to prevent erosion. And you can see that being done over here, which is why I chose that. But it's very, very warm with a lot of precipitation. The second type of humid tropical is tropical wet and dry. So these are going to be areas that are warm year-round, and for part of the year, they get a lot of rain, and the other part of the year, they don't. So humid tropical, and they're going to be broken into wet tropical or tropical wet and dry. And based on the name, you can pretty much figure out what's going on there. Our next this is a Where's Waldo. So if you want to do a quick brain break, if you don't know what Waldo looks like, I'll show you a picture of him. This is what Waldo looks like. So you're going to just look at this picture and see if you can find him. And if you want to pause it, then I'll let you do that. And then I'll show you where he is. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and give away the answer. So if you want to pause it to find him yourself, then please do that now. And Waldo is right here. So there's Waldo. It'd be evil if you did one of these pictures with no Waldo in it and told someone to find him. Okay, this picture, you're just supposed to find the differences. There are 5. So I'll let you do that if you want to pause it. And here are your answers. So in this picture, he's wearing glasses. He wasn't in the other. The cat's nose fell off. The mouse hole is larger. There is no scallop thingy over here, and there's no picture. So those are your 5 differences. Our second type of climate, according to the Köppen Climate Classification System, is humid mid-latitude. So first we talked about wet tropical. Now we're looking at humid mid-latitude. There's 2 types of humid mid-latitude. There's humid mid-latitude with mild winters, or humid mid-latitude with severe winters. So if it's humid, that's going to tell you that there's a decent amount of moisture. There's a good amount of precipitation. If it's mid-latitude, then the zone that it's falling into is that temperate zone. So that means that it's going to, based on the name, humid mid-latitude, it's going to have a lot of moisture, and it's going to have moderate temperatures. So if you are humid mid-latitude with mild winters, that means that your winters don't get too cold. This is where we live. Our winters are going to be under 64 degrees, but they're typically above 26 degrees. But places like Michigan, they're going to be considered humid mid-latitude with severe winters. They're still in the temperate zone. They still get a lot of rain, but their temperatures are typically under 26 degrees in the winter. So that's how he classified those. But again, just think through the names because they make sense. Dry climates. Dry climates are also known as an arid region or a desert region. So arid and desert are the same thing. And if it's a dry climate, that means that the precipitation is less than the evaporation. So you are having more water evaporate and leave the environment rather than water coming down into the environment. There are semi-arid, or there's what we call steep locations. These are transitions to a desert. So say you're in a forest and you're walking towards a desert. It's not like you just take a step and all of a sudden, like, boom, it's a desert. It's going to very gradually get drier and gradually get warmer and gradually have less plants. So that very gradual region where it's getting warmer and warmer and drier, that's what we call the semi-arid region. But basically all you need to know is dry climate is an arid region, which is the same thing as a desert, and the precipitation is less than the evaporation. So that's your dry climate. Highland climates. These are areas that have a very high elevation. And as we already know, the higher the elevation you have, the colder and the more moist it's going to be. So these are cooler and wetter than areas at the bottom of the mountain. And remember, it's cooler because as you go up in altitude, you decrease in temperature. And also, as you go up in altitude and the air gets colder, it condenses, and that forces clouds and precipitation. And here's another brain break where you can find the 5 differences. So if you want to go ahead and pause it, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the answers in case you haven't found them. So the answers are, in this picture, the soap is larger over here, right there. This guy's flowers fell off. There's only one sinkhole, and then the bubbles, or the water on the ground look different. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Am I missing one? That's all I see. I'm only counting 4, but if there's another one, then hopefully you can find that. Okay, polar climate. Polar climates are in the polar zone of the Earth, which makes sense based on the name. Their warmest temperature is still less than 50 degrees. So can you imagine if that's the warmest it ever got was like 45? There's very little precipitation typically, and the winters are extremely cold, and the summer is still cold. There's 2 types of polar climates. One, we call them the tundra, which we'll look at in a little while later, and the other is called ice caps. The ice caps are just plain ice. The tundra is going to have a lot of snow and just be a lot colder. So that's all for his different Köppen, or all of Köppen's climate systems. Last thing we're going to look at is something called a climatogram. So climates are based on temperature and precipitation. So if you are to graph a climate, you're going to graph it based on temperature and precipitation. When we graph a climate, we graph the temperature using a line graph. So as you can see right here, this line graph is showing the temperature region, or temperatures. I usually think, the little dots that make up a line graph, you could think of them as little sunshines. The bar graph represents the rain or precipitation. And you can think about it, or I think about like you can fill up a column of water. So the column is going to be the water, and the line graph is your your temperature. So if they were to ask you a question about this, let's give a little mock question and see how you do. Looking at this bottom one for Savannah, see how it has the months going down here. If I said, in what season did Savannah have the least amount of rain? Then you would say summer, or maybe spring and summer it had the least rain, because it was May through August the least rain occurred. If you said what month was the warmest temperature recorded, then you would say it was in November, because the bar graph goes up higher for here. The one thing I really want to stress about these climatograms is you have to read the graph. Sorry, this picture's so blurry, but say I say on a test question, what was the temperature in October? Well, you come over here to October, and you could come up to where the line graph is and see where this number is. But if you read it based on the number here and you say it's 300 degrees, you're wrong, because this side is precipitation. This side is temperature. So if you're reading a temperature number, you have to make sure that you look at the temperature side. If you're reading the precipitation for October, you're looking at the precipitation side. So temperature on the temperature side, precipitation on the precipitation side. And that's very easily seen. You just got to make sure that you are reading and looking at what it's saying. And it typically will tell you, but if it doesn't, remember bar graphs are rain or precipitation. Line graph is your temperature. And that is it for this. We will look at biomes a little bit later.